In Sussex County, Virginia, there is a hill of sand that a company has been digging up and selling by the truckload. It sits above the Nottoway River and it is covered in prickly pear cactus, which is how it got its name. Somewhere inside that hill, buried in loose sand, were stone blades that should not have been there. And the only thing separating them from everything American archaeology believed was a few inches of dirt. The place is called Cactus Hill, and almost nobody outside archaeology has heard of it, which is strange, because for about 25 years it has been one of the 2 or 3 most important arguments in the field. It is not a cave, it is not a rock shelter, it is a sand dune, and sand is the problem. Sand is loose, sand moves, things fall through it. If you want to convince the scientific establishment that you have found something older than everyone believes possible, a sand dune is close to the worst place on Earth to find it, which is exactly where 2 separate teams found it anyway. The man who did most of the work was named Joseph McAvoy, and he was not a university professor. He ran something called the Nottoway River Survey, and he had spent years walking that stretch of Virginia River country, recording sites, mapping what was there. He was meticulous, he was patient, and he was outside the system, which mattered enormously in what came next. Because when McAvoy began digging seriously into that dune in the early 1990s, the rule in American archaeology was absolute. The first people on this continent were the Clovis hunters, who arrived around 13,000 years ago carrying a distinctive fluted spear point. Beneath the Clovis layer, there was supposed to be nothing, sterile sand, the bottom of human history. And McAvoy found the Clovis layer exactly where it should be. Fluted points, the whole assemblage, textbook. So he kept going. A few inches lower, in places barely 2, the sand gave up something else. Small quartzite blades, prismatic blade cores, unfluted points that did not match the Clovis toolkit at all. Not a stray flake, an assemblage. Somebody had sat in that spot, worked stone, and left. When I look at the scale of this, it honestly blows my mind. I'm not looking at a brand new horizon buried yards below the surface. I'm looking at a sliver of sand no wider than my 2 fingers. It shocks me to think that a gap that small is all that stands between the accepted consensus and an entirely new reality. And that gap is exactly what the critics went after. When the charcoal from the lower level came back from the laboratory, the numbers landed somewhere between 15 and 18,000 years old, thousands of years before Clovis, on a second separate excavation at the same site, run by Michael Johnson of the Archaeological Society of Virginia. The same pattern turned up independently. 2 teams, same dune, same result. Then came the response, and it went straight for the weakest point. The word is bioturbation, and it is the single most powerful objection anyone can raise against a site like this. Bioturbation is what living things do to soil. Tree roots push down through it, burrowing animals move it, insects work it constantly. Over thousands of years in loose sand, small objects can migrate downward, quietly, with nothing to stop them. So the critics argued something simple and honestly entirely reasonable. There is no earlier layer at Cactus Hill. There is one layer, Clovis, and some of its stone has drifted a few inches down through sand that could never have held it in place. You have not found older people, you have found gravity. And I will be honest, this is the argument I would have made. Everything about a sand dune says the layers should be scrambled. Nothing about that site should have stayed in order, which is why what happened next is the most interesting part of the whole story, because there is a way to test sand itself, and it has nothing to do with charcoal or artifacts. It is called optically stimulated luminescence, and what it measures is the last time a grain of sand saw sunlight. Bury a grain, and it starts quietly accumulating a signal from natural radiation in the ground. Expose it to light, and the signal resets to 0. So you can take the dune apart, layer by layer, and ask each one when it was buried. At Cactus Hill, the answers came back in order. Oldest at the bottom, youngest at the top. The layers stacked in the sequence they should be, if nothing had ever churned them. The dune had been building slowly and steadily, and it had stayed put. That does not settle the argument completely. Skeptics point out that luminescence dates the sand, not the stone sitting in it, and the association between the two is exactly what is being disputed. but it moved the site from implausible to genuinely difficult to dismiss, and it is why Cactus Hill is still cited today rather than quietly forgotten. It is worth stopping to picture the place because once you do, the dune explains itself. A high sandy rise above a bend in the Nottoway, dry, well drained, sitting above the floodline with a river below it full of fish and a clear view of anything coming down to drink. It is a good place to camp. It was a good place to camp 18,000 years ago, and it was still a good place to camp when the Clovis hunters turned up thousands of years later, and it went on being a good place to camp for thousands of years after that. That is why the layers stack the way they do. Nobody built anything here. Nobody was making a monument. People simply kept returning to the same sensible spot on the river, sat down, worked a bit of stone, and left a little of it behind each time. And between the visits, the wind kept quietly laying down sand on top of them. The dune is not really a site. It is a stack of ordinary afternoons. There is one more thing about it that I have to mention, because leaving it out would be dishonest. Those small blades attracted attention from researchers who thought this technology resembled European stone tools from the same era and argued for a crossing of the North Atlantic. It became a famous idea. It is also on the genetic evidence not supported. Ancient DNA from the earliest Americans points to Asia consistently. The blades at Cactus Hill are real. The story some people built on top of them is not. Since then, the ground has shifted underneath the whole argument. Monte Verde in Chile was accepted. Footprints at White Sands in New Mexico were dated by 4 separate methods to more than 20,000 years ago. Cactus Hill stopped being an outrage and became a data point. And here is the part that stays with me. That dune was a working commercial sand operation the entire time. While the argument was going on, trucks were still leaving. Part of Cactus Hill has been dug up and sold and spread on somebody's building site, and no one will ever know what was in it. The Archaeological Conservancy eventually secured a portion of the site, so a piece of it is protected now. But only a piece. The rest of the answer left on the back of a lorry. Somewhere out there, under a quarry, under a road cut, under a gravel pit nobody thinks twice about, there is more of this story sitting in loose sand, waiting for someone to look before the machinery gets there. If you found this fascinating, hit subscribe for more stories like this. Thanks for watching.